my soccer universe, to the final review video of the 24-25 season, where we put everything into perspective of what happened in this season, but we also have to review a little bit of playoff action. If you look at the background, on top you see all the league champions from the 6 leagues that we are covering in here, and then on the bottom the teams that perform best, at least to a metric that I will explain in just a sec. And yes, I'm doubling up on PSG, but they won the Champions League, so I think they deserve the double honor in this video as well. Now, as I said, we will be talking about playoffs, where there were playoffs. That's of course Germany, the Netherlands, France and Portugal, and a little bit also promotion picture in La Liga. But I also want to summarize the season, who went into Europe, who got relegated, who got promoted, and I also want to say who performed best relative to their expectations. And what I did there is I have a model where I update the ratings week by week. So I took the points totals that I projected ahead of the season and subtracted them from the actual points achieved. And so the team that performed best by that metric is the team that has the biggest difference between actual points and expected points. So rather simple. I think there could be more sophisticated methods of measuring that, but I thought it's simple enough and everyone will understand. And let's see who were the well-performing teams in Europe. And we'll start a little journey in the Premier League, where everything got finished first. Incredibly, or was it really, 5 teams from the Premier League could lift the trophy this season, with Liverpool being of course the Premier League champions and the most impressive one of them all, and they celebrated their title for the first time in front of their own fans since the 1990s, so a long time and a long wait. Fortunately, there were some ugly scenes in that parade as well. So condolences to everyone who has been affected by these. Curiously enough, of these 5 teams, up until Chelsea won the Conference League, 4 of these have birds in their logo. So we had Liverpool winning the Premier League, we had Crystal Palace, yes, Crystal Palace under Oliver Glasner, winning the FA Cup. We have Newcastle, the Magpies, winning the League Cup, and then we had Spurs winning the Europa League and thus making it to the Champions League, although they only finished 17th in that season. And with Spurs winning the Europa League, we also have an unprecedented 6 Premier League teams in the Champions League. So that's a pretty huge number, with Arsenal and Manchester City making up the numbers. And given that 3 teams from London have won trophies, Arsenal's second place really seems like a disappointment. Arsenal were supposed to challenge. This was supposed to be their year, and the only big London team that did not win a trophy. So that must be overall feel as a disappointment for Gunners. In the Europa League, we have Aston Villa. Yes, they just missed out, also thanks to some shoddy refereeing. However, I think they will be a potent side in the Europa League. Crystal Palace, of course, also in the Europa League. And Nottingham Forest return to Europe. But it's only the Conference League, and they have to qualify for the league phase. And I guess they should, but you're never certain. The relegated teams are the 3 promoted teams from last season, so that's a continued story in the Premier League. Whereas the promoted teams are probably the first teams that one would earmark for relegation. We have Leeds United winning the championship, we have Burnley level on points with them, and then Sunderland winning the playoffs. And so let's also rank these who exceeded their preseason total the most. Well, the best team according to that metric is of course Nottingham Forest. They were supposed to be a relegation candidate. They make it back into Europe, and for a while it really seemed like they could all the way go into the Champions League. But the Premier League is always a long season, and all these small teams, and we see it in other leagues as well, end up missing out. Brentford, Bournemouth, Brighton are the next 3. They had really good seasons, exceeding their expected points totals. However, it's just not enough against the might of the big teams. Liverpool also, of course, as champions, had a pretty good season. Fulham, another team missing out, that had a good season. But you know, you need to put in a huge effort, one like Nottingham Forest, to really make it. On the bottom, of course, we have the 2 Manchester teams. We have Southampton, one of the worst teams ever to play in the Premier League, and Spurs, clearly the most underwhelming team. However, they won't care as much because they won a trophy. On Monday evening, Heidenheim escaped relegation against Elversberg, but it was really a tight game. I mean, for the first half an hour, Heidenheim really came out and pressed Elversberg, and Hansa gave them the lead in the 9th minute. However, when Fallhauer equalized, then the momentum swung towards Elversberg, and they even had a goal disallowed while celebration at the 47th minute, but it was a marginal offside by Aslani that disallowed that goal, and so it seemed to go all the way to overtime when Paul Wanner plays a ball to Scienza, who in the 95th minute gets the winner for Heidenheim, who stay in the Bundesliga. And thus the promotion relegation picture in the Bundesliga is settled. Only 2 teams got relegated in Bochum and Holstein Kiel. Kiel, of course, being a promoted team from last season, whereas 2 major names in Köln and HSV are back in the Bundesliga, and there's some hoping that they will stay in the Bundesliga for a while. Up top, Bayern Munich, of course, are champions again after a year break. Leverkusen, last season's champion, could only keep up the challenge for so long. Eintracht Frankfurt qualify for the first time directly, I think, for the Champions League. And Borussia Dortmund, with a late surge, actually make it in there. Although for a long time it seemed they might just miss out on that target. And so Freiburg, who in the first season after Christian Streich make it only into the Europa League, they almost were Champions League bound. Where Stuttgart salvaged their season that finished mid-table with a Pokal, so they also in the Europa League. Mainz, another sensation that for a while you could imagine going into the Champions League, make it into the Conference League playoffs, with Leipzig sensationally missing out on European action. And let's see who exceeded their preseason total the most, and that is of course Eintracht Frankfurt ahead of Freiburg. Frankfurt having a really good season. Their financial might is just not enough to really push for a championship, or could they? Maybe we will see about that. Freiburg, as I said, first season under Christian Streich, making it back into Europe and almost qualifying for a Champions League was a major success, as was Mainz being so high. Bremen also having a really good season, however, Europe was just a step too far, whereas Bayern also are in the upper echelon, of course. On the bottom, the most disappointing teams, Dortmund in 14th, Bochum, of course, a relegated team. They for a while looked really like one of the worst teams ever in the Bundesliga, but usually those teams make a run in the second half of the season. Hoffenheim, hugely disappointing. Heidenheim, yes, probably the Conference League was a tad too much. And the biggest disappointment has to be, of course, Leipzig. Sadly enough, former last player Keito Nakamura got relegated with Stade Reims. They lost the return leg of the playoff 1-3 at home after overtime, and it started out so well. 1-0 in the 57th minute through TR. However, Udol in the 78th minute gets the equalizer for Metz, who then strike in quick succession in the second half of overtime. Touré in the 110th and Hein in the 114th, making the final scoreline. Metz are back in Ligue 1. Stade Reims relegated after 7 years in Ligue 1. And so we have 3 relegated teams from Ligue 1 in Montpellier, Saint-Etienne and Stade Reims, who will be replaced by Lorient, Paris FC for the first time, and Metz. The latter 2 have been recently in Ligue 1 as well. However, the Ligue 1 season was clearly dominated by PSG, not surprisingly so, also has to be said. However, PSG win the treble for the first time ever, getting the league, getting the cup, and of course winning the Champions League, only the second French team to do so. So PSG, the outstanding team of the season. However, they could also have finished unbeaten this year. However, late in the season they lost twice, and so it was not the perfect season that one would have wanted/expected. OM make it into the league phase. They have been the second best team in France for most of the time, as is Monaco, whereas Nice on the last match day just made it into the playoffs. In the Europa League, we have Lille and Lyon. However, there should be an asterisk with Olympique Lyonnais, as there is some financial trouble and worries, and the DNCG will probably decide by the end of June whether Lyon will get relegated, and should they, then they will not be in Europe as well. Strasbourg for now are in the playoff to the Conference League. However, if Lyon will get thrown out, then everyone else is moving in, so then it would mean Strasbourg in the Europa League and Lens in the Conference League playoffs. And lastly, who has been the best performing team in Ligue 1 this season? Of course, Strasbourg. They were not expected to be that high. They were in for a Champions League slot up until the last day of the season. However, they just missed out. Still, for a very young team, a really impressive season. OM also really outperforming their own expectations for once. So really good work done by De Zerbi there as well. Auxerre, Nantes, and then PSG rounding out the top 5. On the bottom, the most disappointing teams, of course, are Saint-Etienne, Lens really not living up to their lofty expectation. Stade Rennais not having a great season. They were also in relegation trouble. Reims and Montpellier, of course, got relegated. Montpellier probably one of the worst teams that Ligue 1 have ever seen. And they have been not too long ago champions of France, and now they're down to Ligue 2. In the Netherlands, we also have 3 relegated teams as Willem II lose 3-1 at home to Telstar, despite having a 2-2 draw from the first leg. Telstar had an early 2-0 lead, at halftime was 2-1. Telstar back in the Eredivisie after almost 50 years. It's a team close to Amsterdam and of course named after the famous satellite. And so, Telstar join Excelsior and Volendam in the Eredivisie next season, whereas Almere, Waalwijk and Willem II, after just a single year in the Eredivisie, have to go back down to the Eerste Divisie. On top, PSV won the roller coaster of a season. You know, at one point they were the clear champions, then they had this crash in early spring that Ajax then used to open up a 9-point gap with 5 games to go, and Ajax cannot bring that home. A real bottle drop, and PSV repeat as champions. Feyenoord, who had kind of a middling season and also had to change their coaches, at least salvaged the qualification rounds for the Champions League. Utrecht make it into Europa League, as do the Go Ahead Eagles, who are in the league phase of the Europa League thanks to winning the Beker in the Netherlands against AZ. AZ, one of the more disappointing teams this season. At least they win the playoff for the Conference League, but they have to start in Q2, so 3 rounds to make it into the Conference League. That's a really steep run. And if we sort the teams now by how much they exceeded their expected preseason totals, Utrecht, of course, are on top, however, closely followed by Ajax, who were not expected to win this championship. And maybe that's the only mitigating factor on this collapse, that Ajax were not meant to be champions this season. PSV were by far the best team. The Go Ahead Eagles, of course, winning the cup, but also performing really well in the league. Finish in 3rd place in this ranking ahead of Groningen and then champions PSV. On the bottom, we find Twente missing out on Europe, was not really expected. Sparta Rotterdam almost got dragged into relegation battle. Willem II, of course, Waalwijk and Almere, the 3 relegated teams on the bottom of this ranking. In the relegation in Portugal, it is AVS that keep the Liga Portugal status after winning 3-0 in the first leg against Vizela, who just got relegated last season, and then managing a 2-2 draw away from home. So they stay in Liga Portugal, and it's now Boavista and Farense who have to go down into the second league, whereas Tondela and Alverca are promoted. Alverca was a promoted team to the second league in Portugal, and they make it all the way into Liga Portugal, probably one of the top candidates to go down the next season. However, it was an absolute thrilling Portuguese league season. For a while, it seemed like it's a 3-way race between the 3 big teams. Porto started to fall away around February, but then it was a real head-to-head battle between Sporting and Benfica that was more or less decided on the second to last match day in the head-to-head between those two, where Sporting managed to hold on to a draw, and then they got it home in the last round. And then a thrilling cup final where again Benfica had the upper hand for most of the time. However, a late equalizer for Sporting took them to overtime, where they then ended up winning the Taça de Portugal. And so Sporting get a double, although Benfica ran them really close. Porto at least can console themselves with the league phase in the Europa League, whereas Braga have to start in the very early Europa League qualification rounds. And then there's the other sensation of the season, Santa Clara, who make it into the Conference League at the expense of Vitória, who did so well in the Conference League last season. And of course, it is Santa Clara who also lead the ranking of who outperformed the expectations the most. Of course, they were a promoted team. They were supposed to get relegated, similar to Nottingham Forest. They did really, really well this season. Estoril and of course Sporting round out the top 3. Benfica, though, again, running Sporting close, however, just missing out on the top 3. On the bottom, it's of course the 2 relegated teams and Estrella, who did not do well this season, and 2 of them, of course, got relegated. As always, the Spanish league season finishes last, so it is not complete as I'm doing this season review, but we know at least 2 promoted teams in Levante and Elche already. Levante secured their return already last weekend, and Elche now do so on the final match day, leaving 4 teams vying for the last promotion spot. And those are Real Oviedo, Mirandés, the sensation of the Segunda, Santander and Almeria, and we will see who will get in there. However, I have to say that La Liga itself was a really exciting season. At the beginning of the season, it was all about Real Madrid have just won the Champions League. They now added Mbappé. Of course, they will romp through this league. However, I kind of had the feeling that this is just too much no team players up front, with Vini not doing defensive work and Mbappé adding to that as well. And so Real Madrid's season was rather so and so. And that allowed Barcelona and for a while Atletico Madrid to swoop in. And it really seemed like a 3-way title race where it was actually amazing that Real Madrid, despite poor performance after poor performance, stayed in there. Barcelona had a really great start, however then they fell off, and it really seemed to be all lost when they lost around Christmas time to Atletico Madrid. Atletico Madrid on a huge run, seemed poised to be the main challenger for this championship, however then they hit Real Madrid in the Champions League and also Barcelona in the Copa del Rey, and in the end it was then a head-to-head between Barcelona and Real Madrid, where Barcelona just hit the next level with Lamine Yamal, Rafinha and Lewandowski, of course, being the main stars. However, we never should forget about Pedri, for instance, and all the other great Barcelona players. Hansi Flick got a real good team going that will rue that they were not in the Champions League final, but seeing what PSG have done to Inter, an Inter team that Barcelona had on the ropes, but in the end, due to their naivete, let them back in. I fear this could have gotten ugly for Barcelona as well. So Barcelona at least have 2 titles this season, the League and the Cup also won against Real Madrid in a great Copa del Rey final. The 2 Madrid teams, Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, are also in the league phase, as are Athletic Club and Villarreal. La Liga getting 5 spots in the Champions League next season. In the Europa League, we have Betis, the finalists of the Conference League this year, and Celta. That's rather exciting that they make the comeback, and maybe Iago Aspas one last run with Celta, and Rayo are also in Europe. And I really wonder where they will be playing, but that's also a major story. And the 3 relegated teams, Valladolid, horrendous season. One of the worst teams in Europe we had this year. Las Palmas and Leganés were in there up until the end. However, it was just not good enough for them, and they will be replaced by Levante, Elche, and the 3rd team. Unsurprising, with Rayo being back in Europe, of course, this is a team that has very limited possibilities. They make it back to Europe. A great coaching job there, of course, on top of the table of who exceeded their expectations the most. Closely followed by Villarreal, Osasuna and Barcelona. Mallorca also in the top 5. And on the bottom, Valencia, horrid first half of the season. It was actually a miracle that they did not get relegated. Sevilla, horrid second half of the season. Real Sociedad really not doing well all season long. And then Real Valladolid, of course, one of the worst teams ever. And Girona also escaped relegation rather late. Probably Champions League was a tad too much for them. So this was our last journey through Europe on this channel, and potentially even the last journey ever. I have to say these videos were a lot of fun, but they were also extremely work intensive, to the point that I'm not sure if I can continue and keep that one up. I have to see how I will do for next season. However, I will not do it in the same format as I've been doing this season as well. So yeah, hang with me, we'll see where this will go, but it's likely that there won't be a Euro review next season from my part, unless something extraordinary happens. In any case, it was fun having you comment and watch and like these videos. At the beginning it was not that much, but it actually picked up during the season. I want to thank you very much for that. Maybe if you have an idea of how I can make this less demanding, drop a line below. Other than that, thank you very much. enjoy the summer. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos. Not quite like these, but at least on my channel. And I will talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye! Hey there! I really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, here are some videos and playlists that you may enjoy too. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you get notified whenever something happens in my soccer universe. And with that, have a wonderful day. Bye!